way. Come and join me on Furedi.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6 in the next hour. The number of migrants crossing the English Channel likely to hit 21,000 within the next few days. Getting on for 300 people arrived in half a dozen small boats. That was just yesterday. But with the Rwanda plan still yet to get off the ground and controversial plans to house up to 1,200 asylum seekers at a former RAF base in Yorkshire abandoned last week, what next to stop people making the journey and securing our borders? Also this hour, the sociologist Frank Furedi on why he's disappointed by the reporting and response by some media outlets to the attack on Salman Rushdie during a talk on Friday. And this year's heatwave keeps being compared to 1976, hitherto considered our hottest recorded season. We'll look back on that summer of 76 and how it compares to this one. Share with us, please, your memories of the 1976 heatwave, your stories and photos to gbviews at gbnews.uk. And with me for the next 2 hours, having her say on the stories of the day, the journalist and author Ella Whelan. But first, we've got the latest news headlines for you.
Good afternoon. It's just a couple of minutes past 4. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his party's answer to soaring living costs. A £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for 6 months. Paid for, in part, by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. He says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. Labour claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree. They've described the opposition's plans as an illusion. Ministers are coming under increasing pressure to do more to address the rising cost of living. Sir Keir Starmer said his party's solution to soaring costs was the opposite to what the government's providing.
I think in a national emergency like this, where we've got so many families anxious about paying the bills, it's right politically that we say every penny should go to reducing those bills, not to compensating shareholders. What I wanted to make sure was that today we could put a fully costed, credible plan on the table which actually answers the question, what will you do to help so many struggling households this winter?
Britain has become the first country to approve a COVID vaccine that targets both the Omicron and the original strain of the virus. The government says the upgraded Moderna vaccine has been carefully reviewed by its scientific advisory body. It's not yet clear who will be offered the booster or when. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the jab is going to help protect communities.
It's a hugely positive step. The UK is the first place to licence this through the MHRA. It means that UK patients will have access to the broader immunity that the bivalent vaccine offers. So it's an exciting potential and it's good news for the UK population.
The Metropolitan Police are investigating a fatal stabbing in central London this morning. Police say a man died just after midday in Soho in central London. It's a busy area known for its shopping and nightlife. A man's been arrested in connection with the attack. Downing Street says it's ludicrous to suggest that Sir Salman Rushdie might bear any responsibility for the knife attack on him. It's after Iran's foreign ministry has said the author and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left him with life-changing injuries. The 75-year-old was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off a ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hedi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. Today marks 1 year since the Taliban took over Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. A national holiday has been declared in the country as citizens are encouraged to celebrate. The Taliban declared control of the city last year amid a mass evacuation of US forces and refugees. Humanitarian aid into the country has been significantly cut since the Taliban took over, as world leaders demand greater rights for Afghans, particularly for women and girls. Well, defence commentator Jamil Jaffer told GB News he's concerned over terrorist groups reforming in the country.
An important day for the U.S. to mark the end of that military operation. At the same time, very challenging day because of the people that were left behind and our allies that were left behind, and that we continue to try to get out of that country. And of course, the concern that the Taliban will permit Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups to reform there in Afghanistan remains a significant concern with the recent killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri there in Kabul itself.
The Met Office is issuing a yellow warning of heavy rain and thunderstorms with the risk of dangerous flooding for most of the UK. It's a 2-day alert which begins today. It's warning of heavy downpours that could cause flash flooding, disruption to transport and power cuts. The weather warning will stay in place for southern England until Wednesday. Communities could be cut off by flooded roads and the chance of fast-flowing or deep flood water that could cause danger to life. An official complaint's been made to the police watchdog regarding the athlete Ricardo dos Santos being pulled over by police for a stop and search in London. Mr dos Santos was stopped in the early hours of yesterday morning and filmed some of the encounter. Well, the Met Police said its officers had thought Mr dos Santos was using his phone whilst driving. 2 years ago, the Olympic sprinter was stopped by police and dos Santos accused the police at the time of racially profiling him and his partner. 5 officers are currently facing disciplinary hearings for that incident in 2020 after the couple were handcuffed and details of their baby were stored on the police database. Nationwide Building Society is going to give £1,200 to more than 11,000 of its employees to help with the cost of living. The money is going to be given to those earning less than £35,000 a year, which is more than 60% of the company's workforce. You're up to date now on GB News, and we'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head back to Colin.
At 4:07, welcome to you. New figures showing the number of migrants crossing English Channel. The numbers are already doubled the total for this point last year. A total of 20,300 people have now arrived in small boats since January. That's according to government data. After a further 283 migrants were detected on Sunday. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, reports.
Arriving at Dover Harbour overnight, the local lifeboat with 50 people on board who'd been detected crossing into UK waters on a small boat late into the night. These crossings, which just a year ago were predominantly happening early in the morning, are now taking place day and night. The times they cross are now more unpredictable. What is certain is that the numbers crossing are growing rapidly. 20,300 so far this year. That number is double what it was at this time last year. Within days, it'll hit 21,000. And with the exponential rise in the numbers arriving, is on course to easily more than double the 28,500 who crossed in the whole of last year. For the government, this is a deepening crisis ministers seem powerless to prevent. since Boris Johnson announced a three-pronged plan in April to help tackle the small boat crisis. 15,000 people have crossed the Channel. Plans to house up to 1,200 asylum seekers here in the Yorkshire village of Linton-on-Ouse have now been abandoned amid a huge public backlash. And proposals to send thousands of others to Rwanda for processing have been mired in legal challenges and are unlikely to happen anytime soon. Still, both candidates for the Tory leadership say they remain wedded to the Rwanda plan and would consider extending it to include other willing countries, providing they can overcome the legal difficulties.
Well, Mark White's here in the studio. Mark, very good afternoon to you. Groundhog Day, we're doing the story again. The numbers are a little bit higher. And the truth is, the obstacles, and they feel like intractable obstacles in the way of government on this, have not gone away. A solution is not in sight.
That's right. It was less than a week ago, really, when we were talking about that figure of 18,000 having been surpassed, and we were heading for 20,000 within days. Well, sure enough, as night follows day, here we are at that figure now, and really within a few days again we're going to be at 21,000, because we're in that period of the year where mostly there are decent days where these small boats can make the crossing, and they do, because there are thousands of people on the other side of the Channel. They're camped out around Calais, around Dunkirk and around Boulogne, waiting for an opportunity to get on the small boats and get offshore. And as you say, the overall riding concerns and problems have not been addressed here. There's a Rwanda solution, which the British government feels would be a disincentive to come across if you think you're being sent to Rwanda. That's mired in legal challenges and going nowhere anytime fast. The solution for dealing with ever-expanding numbers of people being put up in hotel accommodation is to have these larger asylum seeker camps, like the one on Linton-on-Ouse, which has now been abandoned just a month before the first asylum seekers were due to go in there. And all the time, the real sort of partnership that needs to come up with the goods really is the British-French partnership, where you need the French government to agree to take back those who cross in the first place. And there's no sign that that's ever going to happen. Didn't happen before Brexit. It's not going to happen now.
Ella Whelan, who's our studio guest today for the next 2 hours. Ella, it feels like there's an element of paralysis at the heart of government decision-making at the moment. I mean, to some degree that's inevitable. Boris Johnson is standing back. Whitehall doesn't want to introduce any new policies while the government's waiting for a new leader, as is the Tory party. That's a problem. But there's also an opportunity within the problem, which is whoever becomes our next Prime Minister has the opportunity to get a grip on this if they can find a different way of doing things and something that works.
I think the key word is different, because there's no sign that either Liz Truss nor Rishi Sunak have any kind of radical approach to this, other than repeating in various ways the Rwanda plan. I mean, Liz Truss famously made the headlines for saying, I'll just send them all to Africa, send them all in this kind of very vague, headline grabby, but actually insubstantial plan. And, you say that it's inevitable that this is happening because of the leadership contest. But in actual fact, it's not inevitable. You could do things differently, because we're at various periods of we've got crises going on in the country, whether it's this question of immigration, or also we know the cost of living crisis, where decisions could be being made, or at least detailed plans could be being announced. There's nothing stopping either Truss or Sunak announcing exactly what they're going to do in detail. And actually, you could argue it would be better for democracy, because it would give voters a clear understanding of where they were going to go with these very important issues. But it's all a bit vague, and I think that's not accidental. I think that actually there is no innovative ways of coming up with what to do with immigration. Mark makes the important point that we are to some degree hamstrung by relationships with France, but indeed we shouldn't take a TINA approach to this. Things could be done differently there as well.
TINA approach, remind me what the acronym stands for?
There is no alternative.
There is no alternative, thank you. There is no alternative, it seems right now, Mark, to this thing happening unmolested by government intervention, because there's a problem here, which is coincidental, but you've got the Home Office under Priti Patel, who must be looking over her shoulder thinking, I'm probably not going to be in this job in a couple of months' time. So that's a source of drift, you could argue. I'm not saying there is drift, I'm just saying probably is. And it's the summer. Civil servants go on holiday. Meanwhile, that happens to be the busiest time because the channel's at its most Pacific, when the crossings are reaching their highest numbers. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, no, absolutely. And there's one of the big problems that they have in terms of you don't have the cooperation with France to take returns, but it's not just France. Lots of countries where they know people have come from, they cannot get those countries to take people back, even if they decide at an early stage in this country that you do not meet the criteria as an asylum seeker, we want to return you to whatever country. Lots of countries wash their hands of these people. They say they don't want them coming back. And interestingly, I think what Rishi Sunak said in his 10-point plan, there was an interesting aspect in there, which was trying to tie a returns policy to the aid and investment that you get from the British government as well. So there's an incentive on behalf of whichever government, if you do not sign up to this and agree to take back those who've come from your country in the first place, have failed the asylum test, then we are going to be less inclined to invest and give you aid. Yeah, it's one solution. Lots of different elements to this, but, you know, whoever takes over the Home Office after Priti Patel, and there's not many people think that Priti Patel will be in post when the new Prime Minister comes into office, has got a very, very tough task ahead of them.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Mark White there. Well, Keir Starmer has announced plans to freeze energy bills at their current level until the end of March next year. The Labour leader claimed his proposals would save the average household £1,000. The Conservative government's already announced what it says is £37 billion worth of support for hard-pressed households, but it's under pressure to do more, with bills set to rise this winter, as you know, to more than £4,000. Let's listen to part of what Keir Starmer had to say this afternoon about his plan.
We've got a fully costed plan that says we will keep those prices down. We will not allow these rises to happen, and we are going to have a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies to pay for it. And that is the right compromise, because we're standing with those people who are struggling to pay their bills.
Very pleased to say senior GB News contributor Tim Montgomery is here. Hi to you, Tim. I saw some polling already suggesting that 3/4 of Conservative supporters like this plan.
Yeah, people out there are incredibly worried. And this whole episode reminds me a little bit about Rishi Sunak's failure in his spring statement to announce anything for people on benefits. And I think all the discussion we've had in the Tory leadership race, for example, about the impact of tax cuts on people. Tax cuts I'm in favour of. I think people need something to help them make work pay, to ensure that the economy is reinvigorated. But actually, these energy price rises really hurt the poorest most. And there's been a lack of discussion about that amongst the Conservative leadership candidates. And it disappoints me as a Conservative that while I'm not particularly enthusiastic about the plan that Keir Starmer has come up with, Conservatives yet again seem to be trailing in actually advancing something to reassure people who out there are incredibly worried.
Tim, 30 billion quid of extra spending in the space of 6 months. Oh, and that's 30 billion based on current prices. And the problem with this is you don't know where the price of wholesale gas is going to be, right? So it could be 35 billion. Yeah, it's only 5 billion more. We shouldn't worry.
And absolutely. And this does nothing actually to help business. And business, you know, are really struggling with these bills as well. But I think there's still something important in what the Labour leader has done today. And just, people are very frightened about these bills. There's a little pantry in Salisbury where I live, and it's a place where people get emergency food. And I ended up talking to the people in the queue the other day. And the fear is incredibly real. And just for me, we're all familiar with the numbers when you see polling about how worried people are. But this is, these are people who aren't sleeping. These are people who are very worried about the situation ahead. And the government, because of the interregnum caused by the leadership race, people aren't getting the reassurance that they need.
Ella Whelan.
I think part of the problem is, understandably, everyone is dealing with the here and now, and Keir Starmer is trying to trade very heavily on the fact that, as Tim says, there hasn't been that focus on the poorest, so there hasn't been that focus actually on the kind of a bigger question of what's going on with energy bills from the Conservative leadership hopefuls. But no one, and this includes Keir Starmer, is talking about the long term. And the important point you make about, about the fact that the costing could be different in relation to what wholesale gas prices are. But I think I'm probably more interested in the fact that the start of this year, the Labour Party came out with its energy plan and very explicitly said this has to be based on renewables. They're still very much anti-fracking completely. They're very kind of cagey and itchy about nuclear. They have no sense of the scale of the problem, and they've also seemingly have no sense of where this problem has come from in terms of energy supply and a good energy supply in the future. So, Keir Starmer's plan might sound good today because Tim says the other plans are pretty rubbish, and there's been nothing exciting coming out of Truss or Sunak, but nobody seems to understand that this isn't a crisis for 2022. It's something that isn't going to stop at the end of this year, at the end of next year, or the end of the year after, unless we have some kind of long-term thinking. And the Labour Party's kind of green blind spot on this is going to make all of this stuff worthless. And you also have to say, £1,000 per family or whatever it is, that is still peanuts. If we are talking about the realms of a serious crisis where people can't sleep, £1,000 might be a lot, but when you're looking at thousands and thousands of pounds on your bill and wages not meaning as much anymore, well...
Tim Montgomery, let me do something that probably amounts to bad manners right now, but these aren't my words, they're the words of Malcolm Grimston, who was on 20 minutes ago on Tom Harwood's show. And Malcolm Grimston is an observer of the energy sector of great repute. I remember interviewing him 10 years ago, about the Fukushima nuclear disaster. He's a nuclear expert as well. He gets energy market. And he said one of the upsides to all this is that there are some upsides, right? Hear me out, which is the price goes up and consumption of energy reduces and people start thinking about insulation, for instance, in a way they hadn't done. Remember all the demonstrations 6 months ago, Insulate Britain? Insulate Britain, where are you? Sticking up for higher energy prices.
Well, look, of course there are some benefits of this, and I agree with everything Ella's just said about the importance of tackling the long-term challenge. But what we have to understand is these energy prices are taking place in an environment where people's incomes have already been squeezed for a very long period. There was no wiggle room, no room for error for a lot of households, even before these energy price rises took place. So yes, of course we need the strategic thinking, and I don't know whether either of you have seen it, but the video doing the rounds on social media with Nick Clegg saying, about 10 years ago, well, the trouble is with this false debate about nuclear power, none of these nuclear power stations will come online until 2021, 2022, as if we wouldn't need, extra power now. So look, of course, we have to do this long-term thinking, and I hope this is a wake-up call. But I don't think we should dismiss what Keir Starmer has done today. At the moment, we are in an emergency for people. I think what he's proposed, just like what Rishi Sunak announced last autumn, is too unfocused. It's helping people at the top of the income spectrum, not just people at the bottom, which is why we get these crazy sums like £30 billion. But at least help. It looks like from the Labour Party, help is on the way. And that is just what we need at the moment for people who are absolutely petrified by whether they'll be able to afford to heat their homes in the coming months. And you say that as a Conservative, it's worth... We listen to you. Tim, thanks very much indeed. Tim Montgomery. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, we'll take a trip down memory lane, looking back on the summer of 1976, considered by many the hottest season on record. How do the blistering temperatures of the summer we're having compare? Do share with us, please, your memories of that heatwave, your stories and photos to gbviews@gbnews.uk. That'll be next. First, the latest news headlines with Rosie.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's a hot and sunny one once again out there for most of us. It will stay warm overnight as well, but one exception to the clear and hot conditions, the north and northeast, where there is some lingering low cloud and some mist around coasts. That will continue, I think, in many spots. But elsewhere, high pressure bringing plenty of sunshine out there, barely a cloud in the sky for most of the UK, and that's the way it remains overnight. That low cloud and mist I mentioned affecting the far north of Scotland, some rain attached to it for the likes of Shetland and Orkney for a time, and some extra low cloud and mist creeping into northeastern coasts overnight. But it's a warm night wherever you are, a muggy one, uncomfortable for sleeping with some places like Cardiff and London. Temperatures staying at 18 Celsius through the night. And then a bright start to the day tomorrow. Once any early low cloud and mist gets out of the way, many places will see another sunny day. Again, the far north of Scotland sees a lot of cloud and some patchy rain and drizzle, but elsewhere it's sunshine, strong sunshine and rising temperatures. 30 Celsius in Keswick there, 35 for Worcester. Could see a 36 close to the West Midlands or the West Country, perhaps East Wales as well. So those kinds of temperatures, unusual for the UK and can cause health impacts and impacts to infrastructure because, of course, the country isn't used to this kind of heat. So extreme heat warning in force through the weekend. An uncomfortable night once again for sleeping. A touch warmer even on Saturday night compared with Friday night. Temperatures in some spots staying at 19 Celsius. But that's enough for some showers to develop on Saturday night across northern parts of the UK. They really get going on Sunday for central and western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. Risk of intense thunderstorms, and that occurs more widely on Monday. Where these thunderstorms occur, because they'll be hit and miss, there is the risk of flash flooding.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Pick up straight away with some of your emails, and they're on the migrant channel crossings, which have, well, they're heading towards 21,000. Joan says, can you tell me if migrants in hotels will get free heating this winter? If so, as a pensioner who can't afford heating, I want to be a migrant. Free accommodation, food, heating, etc. Barry says, the government could hire a cruise ship or two or three to process all the illegal migrants in international waters, if only were that simple. Rod says, how on earth can anything illegal be protected by human rights legislation, potentially putting the lives and rights of British citizens at risk? It's mind-boggling. Dam says, if there was the will, our government could deport illegal immigrants to Rwanda. I don't think they could, not while staying true to the law. It's our sovereign country and Rwanda is a willing partner. If there is continued interference from foreign courts, we must pull out of the relevant treaties. That would be a true vote winner in all red wall seats. I agree with you, but these aren't foreign courts that are causing the problems. Talking about working with France and the like is just talk on that. You certainly have a point. Now, thunderstorms are on the horizon. Apologies, by the way, about the last weather forecast, which you probably noticed was slightly out of date. But now, thunderstorms on the horizon. The Environment Agency has already warned that the drought in the UK likely to extend into next year. unless there is heavier than expected rainfall throughout the autumn and winter. The heatwave seems to have passed, at least for now, we hope, don't we, as temperatures begin to drop, moderate, despite those highs of 32 degrees yesterday in the south of the country. Some comparing the long, dry spell to the summer of 1976. Some areas of the UK not seeing rain for the best part of 45 days. Goodness me. Away from drought, scorching temperatures, some people hold fond memories of that summer of sunshine, something the features writer and columnist for the Express and Star, Mark Andrews, has been writing about this week. Mark, welcome to you. I was listening to a farmer on a YouTube video the other day saying, in 1976, I'm pretty sure he said there wasn't really a drop of rain in his part of the country between March and September. So qualitatively, 76 was drier.
Oh, it's certainly dry. It was a very long period of time, wasn't it? I think it went 45 days without any meaningful rain, I believe it was, and it was pretty much no rain from July to September, from what I remember.
People hold those memories of 1976 in a sepia-tinted frame of nostalgia, I think. They remember the good times. They tend to, as is human nature, they tend to overlook the problems it caused.
I think so. It depends where in the country you were, I think. I mean, where I was in the Midlands, it wasn't really that much of a problem, I don't believe. I believe it was more in the south of England when they had standpipes in the streets and things such as that. I think it depends where you were, really.
Well, it may depend where you were, but Mark, consider this. I'm glad you mentioned standpipes, because there is a common habit of just assuming it's unprecedented, it's never been this bad. But actually, the idea now, and do let me know what you think about how our maybe less socially cohesive society would cope with standpipes, but the idea of forming an orderly queue at the end of your road where the water board had installed the standpipe so you could queue with your bottles and buckets even to fill the bath and kettle. I mean, we're obviously a long way from that this year compared to 1976, but actually, thank goodness, because I'm not sure parts of the country have got the social cohesion necessary to cope with that particularly well. Or maybe I'm just wrong, and actually things like the way we dealt with lockdown shows that we're just as cohesive as we've ever been.
I think tempers would probably certainly be strained by that. I mean, I think probably, to be honest, it probably did at the time. It was just obviously we tend to forget these things, but obviously in 76 it was slightly different because it had a very dry summer in 75 as well, so it was two successive left the grounds very dry as a result of that.
Mark, what are your personal reminiscences from that year?
Well, I was only a child at the time, but my reminiscences were very happy. I remember going to Dudley Zoo with my grandfather. It seemed to be every day. It probably wasn't. Playing in the garden. And I had a younger brother who was born that summer as well, so it was a very happy time for me. It was a very, as far as I know, I've only heard happy things up from my family as well from the time. It was, I don't think it's quite as dark as when you hear these people talking about it's been a terrible time now. It isn't my memory of it. It was just a very happy, nice, long summer. Can we have more of them?
I just remember watching endless amounts of Test match cricket on BBC One when they used to have the rights to Test match, and it was just this endless summer of cricket and sunshine. Fantastic. Listen to me.
Yes, and there was, of course, the famous incident in September when rain stopped play for about 5 minutes, and there was a big round of applause. They put down Lords at the time.
Mark, very nice to talk to you. Mark Andrews there. Thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan alongside me to tell me I'm a silly old something.
No, but I think that it is different to 76 because we have better, but not as good as it could be infrastructure these days. We have the capacity to have technology that could solve issues of drought. For example, I'm not talking about sort of futuristic high tech, even things like installing more and better reservoirs, which we haven't actually. We've done very, very few. I think the most recent reservoir in the south of the country was installed, is being planned to be installed. There hasn't been one since 1973. So. We haven't actually, you could say we haven't learnt the lessons from 76 in a way, but we do now have the capacity to meet the challenges of a changing climate. We're just not doing it.
We just tend to be, we enjoy knocking things. There are now 10 million more people living in the UK than there were in 1976. The demands on our water supply are bigger than they've ever been. And we've not seen, to my uncertain knowledge, we haven't seen a standpipe out this summer. So we're getting something right.
Yes, but we're also getting certain things wrong, which is that I really can't stand how water companies, for example, are being let off the hook in relation to this. You have, last week was it, or 2 weeks ago, Holloway Road was underwater in North London from a burst pipe. There was, we get lectured to about turning the tap off in between washing up glasses when you have, executives with private pools and eye-watering sums of profits. So, I mean, I think we need to, rather than listening to the kind of finger wagging to each other, we need to start broadening our scope of criticism.
Ella, thanks very much indeed. Ella's going to be in our Speaker's Corner today. That's coming up next, making her case for free speech. I recommend you tune into that. Also this hour, the sociologist Frank Furedi on why he's disappointed by the reporting and response by some media outlets to the attack on Salman Rushdie during a talk on Friday. First, latest news headlines coming right up.
Thank you very much. It's 4:30 for your top stories from the GB newsroom. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has set out his party's answer to soaring living costs, a £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for 6 months, paid for in part by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. He says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current energy bills over the winter. Labour claims their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree, describing the opposition's plans as an illusion. Britain's become the first country to approve a COVID vaccine that targets both the Omicron and original strain of the virus. The government says the upgraded Moderna vaccine has been carefully reviewed by its scientific advisory body. It's yet not clear who will be offered the booster or when. Downing Street says it's ludicrous to suggest Sir Salman Rushdie might bear any responsibility for the knife attack on him. It's after Iran's foreign ministry said the author and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left him with life-changing injuries. The 75-year-old was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off a ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. And the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning from today of heavy rain and thunderstorms with the risk of dangerous flooding. The 2-day warning covers most of the UK and may see flash flooding, transport disruption and power cuts. It'll stay in place for southern England until Wednesday. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to Brazier in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Not far off 20 to 5. Thanks for your company today. It's time for today's visit to the Speaker's Corner. It's that part of the show where I let my studio guests get their views off their chest about a topic they are really committed to. Today it's the turn of the journalist and author Ella Whelan for the next 2 minutes or so. Ella, the show is yours.
Thank you, Colin. Most decent, sensible people were horrified to hear that the author Salman Rushdie had been attacked, stabbed 15 times in the neck while addressing an audience in New York last Friday. But now that Rushdie has thankfully been taken off a ventilator and is able to talk, reportedly, it's becoming, though very seriously injured, it's becoming clear that some people's sympathy does not extend to solidarity with the assaulted author. If you thought it was just barbaric assailants or extremists in Iran who think Rushdie is to blame for daring to blaspheme their words in his writing, well, you better think again. Like the massacre of Charlie Hebdo staff in 2015 or the beheading of Samuel Paty in 2020, some supposedly liberal voices in the West have responded to this barbarism not with a defiant defence of free speech, but in appeasement to the idea that there are just some things that should not be said. From legislation like the Online Safety Bill to increasing cases of cancel culture, we are slowly giving ground to the idea that free speech and open debate are dangerous things. It's why Cineworld gave in to demands that the film The Lady of Heaven be pulled because of blasphemy. And it's why Batley Grammar School gave in to demands of activists and parents that one of its teachers should be disciplined and threatened even for showing images of the Prophet Muhammad in class, a teacher who, by the way, is still in hiding. Salman Rushdie has been attacked for a book he wrote 34 years ago, but he is not simply an author. He is an example of what can happen when a society gives in to calls for censorship on the grounds of offence. While doctors fight to help him recover, we must now take on the battle for free speech, fighting back against those who would wish to suffocate us with legislation or silence us with weapons. It's time to stand up with Salman and stand for free speech, no ifs and no buts.
Ella, it's about the most important topic I think a news channel can ventilate in many respects right now, and we thank you for your contribution, and I think it's brave to say those things, and I fear it's not a bravery universally shared in the public square.
The depressing thing about this is that it shouldn't take someone to be lying in a pool of their own blood on a public stage for people to recognise the severity of what's happening. And, you know, you have to be careful because what's happened in relation to Salman Rushdie is a very specific instance of censorship. It's in relation to, the details aren't clear in terms of the legal case, but we can assume that it's in relation to the fatwa that was put against him for the satanic verses. It's centrally about the fact that he dared to talk about particular religion, about Prophet Muhammad, about all these things. And for that, he is deemed to be unworthy of life, not even unworthy of a platform. And the response among, it has varied from people saying it's terrible that he got attacked and, nobody should be attacked in this way. But no one's saying nobody should be attacked for talking about the things he talked about. Or worse still, you have, people who I think, don't even warrant sort of naming, but people like Jolyon Morham, who have been commentators online, who have gone as far as suggesting that we need to bring into account Salman Rushdie's privilege, that's important here.
Wow.
That privilege.
He's not very privileged when he's lying on the floor of his life.
I don't know how privileged you can be if you've been living under, incredible sort of security risk for 34 years. But there is just this kind of quisling approach to, it's disgusting actually, it's stomach-turning, approach to the idea that if somebody that you could warrant such an attack for simply saying what you think or writing what you think. And the important thing for people like us, there have been suggestions saying, should you have more security at public events? Should people who speak out, whether it's J.K. Rowling or anyone else, have more protection? And I actually think that's the wrong way to approach things, because what we have to do is change the culture of censorship, in particularly in the West at the moment, because obviously they're, dealing with Iran as one thing and what's going on in that country. But in our own countries, we are from top to bottom now getting into a position where we genuinely, through legislation and also through sort of social interaction, it's becoming impossible to defend free speech. You sound like an extremist if you defend free speech. The extremists are the ones who believe that giving offence, even though actually it's questionable as to how offensive the satanic verses are, but that giving offence or writing something...
I'll tell you what I will say, Ella, very few of those people who took offence have ever read it.
Exactly. I mean, the same thing happened. That's why I mentioned The Lady of Heaven, the recent film that got pulled, which was that just the mere suggestion of reaching into the realms of discussion about religion, this is a specific thing relating to Islamism, not ordinary Muslims, not Islam, but Islamism, a particular kind of extreme religious fundamentalism and political ideology that we just don't want to touch. It's just too much of a hot potato. And it really shouldn't take attacks on someone like Rushdie for us to get it into our heads that this is a serious issue we need to take up.
Ella, thanks very much. Let's turn to the sociologist Frank Furedi, who wrote a column in today's Mail, also blaming the way the attack has been reported. Frank Furedi, welcome to you. What particularly caught your eye?
Well, I think what caught my eye is I actually remember when the fatwa was issued. And when the fatwa was issued, the situation as far as free speech was concerned was much, much better than it is today. In the decades to follow, and now we're living in a world, for example, where the book that Salman Rushdie wrote back in the 1980s could not be published now. I don't think many publishers would touch it. You'll find that within the publishing world, there is now a constant attempt to prevent certain books from reaching the public. There's a kind of language policing which has become institutionalized within the domain of publishing, which is really, really bad news for free speech. But what's even worse, and I think Ella raises some very important points here, what's even worse is that our own civil service, which is the institution of our state, is actively involved in the business of language policing. The civil service is continually issuing documents that instruct people about what can and cannot be said. What is it that you can write and not write? The civil service is issuing soldiers in the army and in other sections of the state to use pronouns in their emails. And if they refuse to do so, if they basically say, I'm not adopting this silly habit, you can get punished. And many of them do get punished for this. So we're now living in a world where people pay lip service to free speech. People rhetorically are horrified by what happened to Salman Rushdie. But as Ella was suggesting earlier on, their being horrified is always qualified but with the words, but maybe he was asking for it, or maybe there's a reason why he was attacked, or maybe there's a reason why the Iranian government issued that fatwa, and thereby relieving the anti-free speech brigade of their responsibility for creating this.
There are things that can be done. Funny you mentioning about the publishers. I think it was on Saturday, Sunday, I forget which, went onto the Amazon website to see whether it was possible to order a copy of the Satanic Verses. It was, but there weren't many of them, and they were second-hand. And I thought, well, what's the role of the publisher here? And we know, because we've seen again and again, haven't we, how publishers fight shy of publishing things which, on the shop floor of those publishers, the staff don't always like. And in this instance, by the way, I've got no problem with that. I wish people were honest about their motives in a lot of this. There's a lot of comedians, for instance, who talk about being brave, iconoclastic, but they target the usual subjects. They don't tackle Islamism. And here's an instance where actually the state, you could argue, needs to intervene. A one-off purchase, for instance, of 1 million copies, or 500, whatever the number is, of the Satanic Verses. You don't need to change the law, you just need to send out a signal.
That's right, you need to send out a signal, but there is a deeper cultural problem. So, for example, in one of our publishing houses, there was a bit of a rebellion where some of the younger members of the company basically said they're not going to touch anything by J.K. Rowling, and she was trying to publish a children's book, and that kind of it created this kind of mini revolt. Now here, you have a situation where people almost spontaneously decide to police publishing, to become almost like freelance censors, and that's a very difficult thing to overcome either by the state or by laws or by rules, because things have become so deeply embedded as far as being hostile to free speech is concerned that it's very, very difficult, which is not an argument for not trying and not pointing out the importance and taking a stand on our part. I just want to say one little thing, which is what I'm really worried about. If you talk to children who as young as 4, 5, or 6 are already being told what language they can or cannot use, and they're already being told about pronouns. They're already being told about the fact that perhaps speaking freely is not a kind of a blessing. It's a kind of mixed blessing that they should be a little bit wary of. And it means that by the time you're 18 or 19 and you come to university, your views about free speech has already become a little bit ambivalent. And although you...
Can I just draw one really key distinction in this? I don't want to be mealy-mouthed about it. I mean, it's one thing to feel you can't say what you want to say for you fear losing your job. It's another thing because you fear losing your life. And isn't that the lesson of what's happened here? That this is qualitatively different. This is qualitatively different. We all know it is. And it's why, I think people are obviously reluctant to stand up because they're frit. And I don't blame them for being frightened.
You're absolutely right. But the point I suppose I would try to make is that if you create a terrain where speaking freely becomes a problem and difficult, then on that terrain you can have very horrific, violent attitudes also flourishing towards people, where they can justify a stabbing, or they can justify beating people up on the grounds that those words should not have been said. So I think there's a link between that. There's a cultural precondition for the kind of climate that we're in, and there's a cultural precondition that prevents a lot of good people from standing up and being a little bit more robust in defending people like Salman Rushdie and demonstrating to the world that we're going to watch each other's back rather than allow this stuff to continue.
Frank, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Frank Furedi there. Real gear change in stories. Campaigners in St Austell have started a petition calling for the immediate removal of a statue which has been given a place of prominence in the Cornish town. Apologies if you're listening on the radio, but actually in this instance it's probably not such an awful thing. I'm not sure you want to see this statue. It was commissioned to recognise and celebrate the China clay industry, but local residents have likened it, again, I think for reasons that are maybe a little bit obvious, to a giant kebab skewer. The outcry turned our thoughts to other public art that we've learned to be at least indifferent to. The journalist and broadcaster Mike Parry is with us now to run through his top 3 eyesores. Mike.
Well, you call them eyesores, but all statues are magnificent, aren't they? Because they tell you something about somebody who's alive, but more normally about somebody who's not with us anymore. And that's how we remember our past, which makes us look to our future. Now, Ronaldo, right? Probably the most famous footballer on the planet at the moment. Don't know if he's going to be the most famous footballer of all time, maybe Bobby Charlton or Wayne Rooney. But this statue appeared for the first time in 2017 at Madeira Airport, because Ronaldo, as we all know, is Portuguese, of course. He was captain of the Portuguese team that won the European Championships. So they put
they caught the hair, Mike. They got the hair right, but not much else.
Well, I'll tell you a very funny story. A group of English tourists went to Madeira. They walked through the airport. One of them was a big motor racing fan and asked a local official, why have you got a statue of David Coulthard in Madeira Airport? Because it does look more like David Coulthard than Ronaldo. Anyway, look, the mockery existed and persisted and went around the world. And within 15 months, it was taken away and replaced by another statue made by a local artist. The original one, believe it or not, went to Goa in India because there are, some people don't like this, but there are colonial contacts between Portugal and Goa. And then people said, why have we got Ronaldo's statue, a Portuguese star, in Goa? So it got taken out of there. So I'm afraid that original statue, which wasn't very good and didn't look much like Cristiano Ronaldo, is now hidden away and may never be seen again.
One down, 2 to go, Mike.
Right. Now, the middle one is a statue I don't even want to call a statue, OK? So I want to get this out the way before I come to my third disastrous statue. But it's the, I don't even know what to call it. I think it's called something like the cream and poppy cherry statue on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square. Now, if you can make sense of that, Colin, you're a better man than me. What is it? Do you look at it from the front or from the back? Why is there what appears to be a crashed Zoom sort of, aircraft sitting on the back of it? It looks a bit like it could be some sort of overgrown ant, with a spatula coming out of its face. I just don't get it. I don't know why it's there. Doesn't make any sense. But apparently it's modern art. But to me, absolutely dreadful.
And your third one, Mike, is what?
Right. OK, let me tell you this. A few years ago, I'm an Everton fan, and I was at Fulham. And Everton must have been playing Fulham that night, or else I wouldn't have been there. I came out of the boardroom late on because I was a guest and we had a few late drinks. I walk around the edge of Fulham Stadium and I suddenly realised there's a load of really bright lights and a crane. And I walked around the corner and they were taking away the Michael Jackson statue from Fulham's ground. You might remember that Mr. Mohammed Al-Fayed once owned Fulham, OK? He had this amazing statue put up of Michael Jackson, who he had befriended during his lifetime through his wealth and his power and his ability to attract, some of the world's pop stars to his business empire. But once he left and the club was sold, it was sold to a new owner who owned an American football club. The first thing they did was take it away. But I actually witnessed it being taken away. What I found absolutely amazing is that Mr. Mohammed Al-Fayed is one of the richest men in the world, but the statue was one of the cheapest. It was made of paste. It was made of resin and papier-mâché. It wasn't made of metal. It wasn't a valuable statue. It was a piece of old tat. But guess what? It became such an iconic piece of Fulham Football Grounds Stadium that the National Football Museum in Manchester asked if they could have it for a couple of years as a representation of Fulham Football Club. I mean, can you believe it? A Premier League football club represented in the National Football Museum in Manchester, Northwest, one of the homes of football, by Michael Jackson.
Yes. The state of football. Yes, I could. Mike Barry, fascinating. We'll get you in as our regular art critic. Thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan's alongside me. Controversially, I quite enjoyed the middle one on the plinth.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with... I don't know if I agree with you, but that's the thing with these kind of... The problem with modern art is that you have to do something exciting. You're meant to be doing something new, but more often than not, it seems a bit facile. The one I would mention is Maggie Hambling's sculpture of Mary Wollstonecraft, which is in Newington Green in North London, which, representation of Mary Wollstonecraft, you might expect, some books and traditional thing. And it's a huge, I think, silver eyesore with a very small naked lady at the top. And it caused incredible controversy when it was just put up. So one of the things to think about when you're thinking about public art is there's the art in and of itself, and then there's the discussion it creates. And the one thing you could say for Hambling is that she created one hell of a row and one hell of a discussion, which actually was quite interesting, even if I do walk past it and think, oh, good Lord.
That's the point. And as long as it's not coming from taxpayers' money, public subscription, that's all fine, isn't it? You haven't got time to respond to that. We've got 4 seconds left. Ella, thanks very much indeed. It is coming up to 5 o'clock. We'll take a break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there. Coming up live at 5, just over 28,000 migrants crossed the Channel last year, but just 8 months into this year, we're already close to hitting 21,000. Almost 300 people arrived in the UK in half a dozen small boats. That was just yesterday. But with the Rwanda plan still yet to get effectively off the ground, and controversial plans to house up to 1,200 asylum seekers at a former RAF base in Yorkshire abandoned last week, what next to stop people making that journey across the Channel? Also, a royal downsize as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge swap their Kensington Palace home for a comparatively modest 4-bedroom cottage on the Windsor estate, a move that will see them without a live-in nanny for the first time in their children's lives. Reaction with a former royal editor at The Sun, Charles Ray. And before 6, we'll ask, does comedy ever go too far? The comedian Jerry Sadowitz had his Edinburgh Festival show cancelled for what the venue called extreme racism and misogynistic content. With me for the next hour, the journalist and author Ella Whelan, but first the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 minute past 5. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Labour leader has laid out his party's answer to soaring living costs, a £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for 6 months, paid for in part by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. Sir Keir Starmer says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current energy bills over the winter. Labour claims the measures would reduce inflation by up to 4%, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagrees, calling the plans an illusion. Sir Keir says Labour's solution to soaring costs is the opposite to what the government is providing.
I think in a national emergency like this, where we've got so many families anxious about paying the bills, it's right politically that we say every penny should go to reducing those bills, not to compensating shareholders. What I wanted to make sure was that today we could put a fully costed, credible plan on the table which actually answers the question, what will you do to help so many struggling households this winter?
Britain has become the first country to approve a COVID vaccine that targets both the Omicron and original strain of the virus. The government says the upgraded Moderna vaccine has been carefully reviewed by its scientific advisory body. It's not clear yet who'll be offered the booster or when, but Health Secretary Steve Barclay says the jab will help protect communities.
It's a hugely positive step. The UK is the first place to licence this through the MHRA. It means that UK patients will have access to the broader immunity that the bivalent vaccine offers. So it's an exciting potential and it's good news for the UK population.
Heathrow Airport has announced it will extend its cap on passenger numbers until the end of the summer. The airport says a daily limit of 100,000 departing travellers will now apply until October the 29th. It also says the cap could be lifted earlier if it can improve its current labour shortage. The Metropolitan Police are investigating a fatal stabbing in central London this morning. Police say a man died just after midday in Soho in central London, a busy area known for its shopping and nightlife. A man has been arrested in connection with the attack. Downing Street says it's ludicrous to suggest that Salman Rushdie might bear any responsibility for the knife attack on him last week. It's after Iran's foreign ministry said the author and his fans are solely to blame for the attack that's left him with life-changing injuries. The 75-year-old was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off a ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. Today marks 1 year since the Taliban took over Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Citizens are encouraged to celebrate with a national holiday declared in the country. The Taliban took control of the city last year amid a mass evacuation of US forces and refugees. Humanitarian aid has been cut significantly since the takeover, as world leaders demand greater rights for Afghans, particularly women and girls. Defence commentator Jamil Jafar told GBNews he's concerned about terrorist groups reforming in Afghanistan.
An important day for the U.S. to mark the end of that military operation. At the same time, very challenging day because of the people that were left behind and our allies that were left behind, and that we continue to try to get out of that country. And of course, the concern that the Taliban will permit Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups to reform there in Afghanistan remains a significant concern with the recent killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri there in Kabul itself.
A complaint has been made to the police watchdog after athlete Ricardo dos Santos was stopped and searched for a second time in London. The Olympic sprinter was pulled over early yesterday morning. He filmed some of the encounter. The Met Police says its officers thought he was using his phone while he was driving. Previously, Dos Santos had accused police of racially profiling him and his partner when he was stopped 2 years ago. 5 officers are currently facing disciplinary hearings for that incident in 2020. And the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning of heavy rain and thunderstorms for most of the UK. Heavy downpours could cause flash flooding, disruption to transport and power cuts. The 2-day alert begins today and will stay in place for southern England until Wednesday. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Brazier.
At 6 minutes past 5. Thanks for your time. New figures show the number of migrants crossing the English Channel. It's already double the total for this point last year. A total of 20,300 people, these are the ones we know about, have now arrived in small boats since January, and that's according to official government data, after a further 283 migrants were detected on Sunday. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, reports now.
Arriving at Dover Harbour overnight, the local lifeboat with 50 people on board who'd been detected crossing into UK waters on a small boat late into the night. These crossings, which just a year ago were predominantly happening early in the morning, are now taking place day and night. The times they cross are now more unpredictable. What is certain is that the numbers crossing are growing rapidly. 20,300 so far this year. That number is double what it was at this time last year. Within days, it'll hit 21,000, and with the exponential rise in the numbers arriving, is on course to easily more than double the 28,500 who crossed in the whole of last year. For the government, this is a deepening crisis ministers seem powerless to prevent. Since Boris Johnson announced a three-pronged plan in April to help tackle the small boat crisis, 15,000 people have crossed the Channel. Plans to house up to 1,200 asylum seekers here in the Yorkshire village of Linton-on-Ouse have now been abandoned amid a huge public backlash. And proposals to send thousands of others to Rwanda for processing have been mired in legal challenges and are unlikely to happen anytime soon. Still, both candidates for the Tory leadership say they remain wedded to the Rwanda plan and would consider extending it to include other willing countries, providing they can overcome the legal difficulties. Mark White, GB News.
Well, somebody who's had an abiding interest in this subject for many years now, at times has been a lone voice in the wilderness, but keeps at it, is the chairman of Migration Watch, Alp Mehmet, who's here in the studio with us now. Alp, welcome to you. The numbers keep on rising, and I know we're focusing on them now because they're bigger, it's summer, the Channel at times is like a mill pond. What's been remarkable about this evolving story is that come the winter, when the Channel gets choppier, they'll still be coming.
They will indeed, as we've pointed out over and over again. At the moment, it looks as if we're going to get something like 50 to 55,000, around that sort of figure by the end of the year. And believe it or not, the Home Office and officials in the Home Office regard this as some sort of success because it's not quite as many as they expected to arrive, which is a nonsense. But I tell you what really depresses me, Colin, and the fact that the two leadership candidates really have firstly come up with nonsensical ideas and nonsensical procedures for cutting it all back. That aside, they're also ignoring immigration, legal immigration, which is fantastic. It's back to record levels.
To be fair to them, everybody's ignoring that.
That's because, dare I say, people are focusing on the Channel. It's obvious. Yeah. The optics are there. There we've got people marching up gangways. Yeah, of course, that's going to make better pictures. But the fact is, serious as that is, 50, 55,000 in 1 year is a huge number that you've got to look after, you've got to house, you've got to take through the process. But then if you're looking at all those who've come legally as well, what does that do to the demand for housing, for example?
I'm a big fan. I think you've got to be slightly careful about that because I take your point about how pictures tell stories. And obviously, Mark White sat where you are before. He said, we're ignoring the numbers of people who are still being smuggled in lorries. And it's probably a number at least twice as big as those coming across in the boats. But there's obviously a difference, it seems to me, between these people, very often of whom it can be said they're not entering this country in good faith if they're destroying their passports routinely, throwing the mobile over the side, anything that helps us identify them. That's a really bad foot to get off on a relationship with this country. That's qualitatively different from somebody who comes to this country as a legal migrant to work in a sector.
Sure, yeah, and I'm not suggesting that there are people coming in illegally. All I'm saying is that the numbers, if we're talking about numbers, if we're talking about those who need housing, those who need medical attention, we've got to look beyond the Channel. Serious though that is, I'm not suggesting that the Channel isn't serious, because it's going to get even more serious. And that's the problem, that unless we can show that you won't be allowed to stay here, you won't make your way into Britain simply by getting into a boat and being rescued by a British vessel or making it on shore. Until we can show that that won't work, then the numbers will continue to go up and up and up.
And it's hard to know where the upper limit is. We thought we'd got there, and every year, the end of every year, it gets higher. And when you've got some of the population pressures, for instance, in sub-Saharan Africa, 2050, 4 billion people, 4 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa. There'll be by then established routes, migratory routes to the UK and elsewhere. And you've got a diaspora saying, the quality of life here is pretty good. Think about it. So, these numbers will continue to rise inexorably.
Undoubtedly. In fact, there were figures released over the weekend that I saw, it may have been before the weekend, of the numbers getting into the EU. And those coming in illegally are 86% above what they were this time last year. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, a lot of whom, I'm afraid, will make their way to the northern shores of France.
Ella Whelan.
I think one of the things about discussions about immigration is that you can't, it's so multifaceted. And, you know, you just mentioned, you know, the people living in sub-Saharan Africa and diasporas or their relatives telling them to come over here because it's a better quality of life. That's true. And part of the problem is that, you know, their lives in those countries are affected by decisions that are being made in the UK to a certain degree and Western countries. For example, if you look at the kind of aid that we give, it is a lot of it is pretty centrally based around a political narrative that says these countries shouldn't be allowed to develop. There should be environmental concerns. You know, you can only spend the money on nice little, you know, wells and things that are sustainable, rather than have big industry, rather than consume coal, rather than do all the things that we were allowed to do. So if they can't do that, and their countries have a future of being the same, if not worse, then you can't really. Then it's very difficult to point the finger and say you are to be blamed for wanting to escape what we would consider to be a pretty nightmarish future of no development. That's one thing. On another thing, and this is why I'm kind of talking about it being multifaceted, housing in this country is, we would be wrong to blame the question of housing resources, and I'm not really suggesting that Alp is doing this, on migrants, whether illegal or legal or anything coming in, because the housing shortage is the fault of British politicians rather than people coming over on dinghies.
Ella, surely Alp is right occasionally, and he is not a lone voice, but yeah, but he has been saying this for years. He's been pointing out, and people like Nigel Farage doing the same thing, pointing out that actually the pressure on public services and housing, it's just so. You have hundreds of politicians and lobby groups and charities all saying it's the fault of this, that and the other, and ignoring the role of migration. Alp.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things that we do agree on, and of course the conditions in Africa generally, not just sub-Saharan Africa, are appalling. And I've worked there in West Africa. I know what it's like. But the fact is, if Ella is blaming that on Britain and the West,
she says,
well, that was implied in what you said.
I think it's a pretty central thing that if Western countries who have the most global power say you're not allowed to develop, then no. But if we
the reason large parts of Africa are in a mess is because of Africa. I mean, right? That's
yes,
the main reason.
But
because of corrupt rulers and a kleptocracy. And all
of course, but if I can just make the point is that we still hold, particularly in the West, and particularly in relation to British aid, so much of the discussion of British aid is about global power, soft or otherwise, and I think we use that in a way to influence or stymie development in other countries.
Billions and billions into aid.
But it's conditional.
It's not conditional at all.
Read the documents that they're all about being sustainable and things like this.
I'm sorry, Ella, but whatever's happening now, over years and years and years, we've poured billions into aid, into development, and it's been misused, it's been wasted. And I've seen that.
Agree.
And that is not something that we can be blamed for. But if you're saying that these people have a right to come here for a better life, how many are we actually going to take? And you say about housing, well, all I'm pointing out is that whoever comes here needs a roof over their heads. And if we're talking about millions of people, and we are, 3.5 million or thereabouts over 10 years, immigration, direct or indirect, that was in the census. We're talking about a lot of people. Of course, that's going to put pressure on housing, on the NHS, on congestion, on all sorts of things.
We've got to move on. It continues to be an incendiary debate, but one we've tackled sensibly, I think. Alp, thanks very much indeed. Alp Mehmet there. A royal downsize, as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are reportedly moving from Kensington Palace to a 4-bedroomed cottage, it says here, cottage. For the first time, there'll also be no live-in nanny for the couple's children, George, Charlotte and Louis. Let's turn to the former royal correspondent for The Sun, Charles Ray. Hi to you, Charles.
Hello, Colin.
We had our meeting today, and not least because there's a big online appetite for the story about the Sussexes coming to the UK. We might talk about that. But I think that's... when we look back, when historians look back, years from now, they won't look back on what the Sussex are planning on doing today. I think they'll look back at this story, the idea of a future king and queen of our country downsizing to live in a house where actually there is 1 bedroom per child. And I don't know how much time they're going to spend in it. Maybe you do. But as a symbolic gesture, it feels quite profound.
Well, let's be clear about this, Colin. They're not moving into a council house. This is quite a sizable 4-bedroom house. It's Adelaide Cottage, which was named after Queen Adelaide, the wife of William IV. And you're absolutely right. They are downsizing from Kensington Palace, but there is a number of reasons why this makes it a good idea for the Cambridges. One is the children's schooling. They're nearby. Also, they're going to be much closer to the Queen, and the Queen is now officially living in Windsor. Also, you've got other members of the royal family, Edward and Sophie, living very close by, as well as the Middletons and her siblings are also nearby as well. So there's lots of reasons why this is a good idea. But let's not forget that one day this couple are going to be king and queen, and it will be back to the huge palaces that they've been used to.
And you know, we if you are presenting your head of state with all the history behind them that represents and the wealth they've accumulated over many, many centuries, you know, there doesn't seem a lot of public support in this country for a sort of Netherlands-style bicycling monarchy where our royals walk around in flip-flops and shorts and generally sort of and the hair shirt and the yurt.
I'd be money to see that, Colin.
Should we, Charles, while we've got, moving swiftly on, should we talk about the Sussexes coming over in a month or so to Manchester? They can't stay away.
Well, no, and surprisingly, they can't stay away from a country that they clearly do not like anymore. That's very, very interesting as to whether there's actually going to be a meeting of some description with the Queen, because they are arriving on September the 5th in Manchester. They're attending the One Young World Summit. Now, interestingly, that's the same day as the Conservative Party announced the new leader of the party, and then after that, they go straight off to Germany, where they're going to take part in an Invictus Games event. Now, the Queen will be coming down from Balmoral to formally install the new PM at Buckingham Palace. Now, that's on Tuesday the 6th, which time they're still in Germany. Now, what we don't know is whether the Queen's going to go straight back to Balmoral, because the couple are back in London on the 8th. For the Well Child Awards in London. So are they going to go up to Balmoral to see the Queen? Is the Queen going to stick around and they come over to Windsor? We don't know when they're actually going to be leaving the country. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I'm sure there'll be interpretations. If they don't see the Queen, there'll be all sorts of snubs one way or another involved.
One person we shouldn't snub today is the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, whose birthday it is today, and by many measures persists in being the hardest working royal.
She does, and she quietly gets on with all the jobs that she does and everything else. I mean, she's a remarkable workhorse, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. She takes part in all sorts of events and largely goes, uncredited or unpublicized, really. I mean, she's not, if you like, she's not fashionable enough now for newspapers and television and radio anymore, but she's there working hard and doing her best. There's a lot of credit to this woman.
Yeah, it's a point that's often overlooked by people, particularly those who argue for a slimmed-down monarchy, Charles, that actually there's a huge appetite from organisations and charities and voluntary organisations and new schools that are opening for a member of the royal family to come and snip the tape and plant the tree or whatever else it is, and she keeps on doing it. Charles Ray, really nice to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much. Lots of you getting in touch with your thoughts on Ella Whelan's Speaker's Corner contribution today during the show. She made the case for free speech and the importance to protect any attack against it. You can watch it back on our YouTube channel or indeed on Twitter as well. Marianne emails to say Ella is right in what she says. We should all be brave enough to speak out in defence of free speech. This is, by the way, in relation to the Salman Rushdie attack. This email goes on to say too many of us shy away from it, even though we all agree about the absurdity of things like the response to the Lady of Heaven. That was a film that was banned by a cinema chain, or the treatment of the Batley school teacher. We must never forget that many of our ancestors gave their lives for our right to free speech. Monica says, I often hear you can't say that, to which my response is, we live in a free country. Do we, though? The direction of travel in this country is very concerning. And Linda says, well said, Ella. I'm sick of having to moderate my language because people might be offended. Nobody says anything because they'll be called out by haters. Ella Whelan, it's nice to have some praise, and you have it.
Very unusual, but I am enjoying it, so thank you.
Okay.
But actually, I think the issue of free speech is something that most people feel very deeply about, and I think the tide is turning and people are feeling more willing to speak up, and that's something to be celebrated at this dark time of reflection after the attack on Rushdie.
Ella, thanks very much indeed. You're with Colin Brazier. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up, the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, today announced his party's plans which would see a freeze on energy bills at their current level until the end of March next year. He's called out the Conservative government for their ability to support families with the cost of living crisis. We'll bring you that story and more after the break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, 26 minutes past 5. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV and on radio. Keir Starmer's announced plans to freeze energy bills at their current level until the end of March next year. The Labour leader claimed his proposals would save the average household £1,000. It's a perfect kind of policy when you can round it down to those numbers, isn't it? Well, the Conservative government's already announced what it says is £37 billion worth of support for households, but it's under pressure to do more, with bills set to rise this winter to more than £4,000. The truth is, nobody's really sure where the bills will end up. This is part of what Keir Starmer had to say this afternoon about his plan.
got a fully costed plan that says we will keep those prices down. We will not allow these rises to happen, and we are going to have a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies to pay for it. And that is the right compromise, because we're standing with those people who are struggling to pay their bills.
Well, the former chief exec of Energy UK is Angela Knight, who joins us now. Angela Knight, Keir Starmer, you heard him say it then. There already is, he neglected to say there already is a windfall tax, and he's thinking of another one.
Yes, as I understand it, he's backdating it. So in effect, he's saying to companies, well, you might have thought that you'd paid all the tax for at that part of the year, but now we're going to come back to you for yet more money. Now, I think that there is, as we all know, a real worry by a lot of people about what's going to happen to their energy bills. And indeed, that's reflected as well in industry. So a statement which says, I'm going to freeze your energy bills and you're not going to pay any more, is on the face of it enormously attractive. And I don't think we should pretend otherwise. But it does have a number of holes in it. The very people who he is saying, right, I'm going to retrospectively tax you, are those who are already paying tax at 65%. That's a huge tax bill the oil and gas company is already paying. And what's more, we want them to invest more in order to get some more gas for us out of the North Sea. Secondly, he's only talking about, 6-8 months. Now, we're not in, sadly, a situation which is going to be resolved in 6 or 8 months. We're in here in this difficulty for, I would now say probably about 2 years, and it could even be slightly more. So rather than saying 30 billion now and then another 30 billion and then another 30 billion, which becomes endless and which you all know we're going to end up paying anyway on the tax, I think that there's two possible runners which make sense. The first is that there is additional help given to those who are on the poor end of society. I think that is right and proper. It'll be people on low incomes, those who are retired, and clearly there is something there which needs to be done. The second is rather more adventurous, has been put forward by a number of the energy companies, and it's a mixture of things. And one is it moves some of the costs off the energy bill, and they go on to the taxpayer. And that is the green energy costs, it's some of the other policy costs, it's something about the networks as well, because after all this, it's less than 60% of your actual bill is gas and electricity. And then the major suppliers, that's not the people who take it out of the ground, it's not the people who are making a lot of money, the suppliers say, we'll hold the bill, but give us some access to soft loans, and then we'll manage the next 2 years, and then we'll all know where we are then after 2 years, and we'll sort out how to spread this over a much longer period of time. So we move to what is a new world of energy pricing, but we do it slowly and at a timetable that is affordable for all of us, and at the same time reform the market. You've heard me say before on this programme that it is absolutely ridiculous that our electricity wholesale market is pulled up dramatically by the gas-fired power stations rather than it being separated out into nuclear, into other low carbon, which are generating at a much lower price, but the wholesale price is, as I say, artificially raised by the gas price. And that is because of an algorithm set on what they call the electricity pool, and it's an algorithm of yesteryear, and it's not one for today. So reform that at the same time, get some investment going in some new nuclear, get some more gas temporarily out of the North Sea, whilst that 2-year smoothing period takes place. Now, it's complicated. It's not got a big headline about it. It doesn't sound political either. But actually, it could be a really good thing to do, and combine that with a bit more help for, as I say, those on low incomes. And we then have got a reform that would work for us all.
And Angela Knight, people, in particular your point about help for those on the lowest incomes and making sure people are not really left in a mess. People get that. But what do you say to those who argue, and they are very small in number, at least those prepared to put their head above the parapet, who say there's a lot of catastrophising going on here, and actually there has to be an argument for moral hazard, by which I mean this idea that price changes behaviour. If you are, include myself, I can't be alone in turning off light switches that I didn't switch off 2 months ago, because I'm now a little bit more conscious I was of what I'm spending on my electricity and other fuel bills. Again, it's bad manners even to raise this, because people say, well, what about those people who are going to be dying of the cold this winter? They die every winter. This winter, the numbers may be higher. It's dreadful, and the state clearly has an obligation to stop that happening. But there surely is an argument for saying, actually, the only thing that really encourages people to reduce their energy intake sometimes is price.
Yes, it is, absolutely. And the other big thing for reducing your energy intake is better insulation. So you're absolutely right to point out that we can be wasteful. My dad always used to say to me, turn the lights out, it's like Blackpool Illuminations. And he says, if you're cold, go and put on a cardigan. Now, you can do quite a lot yourself, but everybody cannot do everything. And I do believe as well that there's a certain element of we've hyped this up to a real dramatic level, and Vladimir Putin must be laughing fit to bust at the way he's managed to tie the West up in knots over this. And that's why, I go back to what was my rather long and complicated way of what I called smoothing our way from where we are now in the way of gas and electricity and our pricing to where we will be in the future, which it will be, I'm sure, higher priced, but we do it at a pace in which people can accommodate.
Okay.
And I think that the real issue here is as much the fact that we do cliff edge after cliff edge as anything else.
There ought to be scope on this news channel as elsewhere for long and complicated answers. Angela Knight, we appreciate you for yours. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we ask, does comedy go too far? The Scottish comedian Jerry Sadowitz has had his show cancelled from the Edinburgh Fringe for what organisers described as extreme racism and misogyny. We'll discuss whether it's possible for a joke to go too far. First, the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Colin. It's exactly 5:34. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has set out his party's answer to soaring living costs, a £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for 6 months, paid for in part by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. He says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current energy bills over the winter. Labour claims their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%. But the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagrees, describing the opposition's plans as an illusion. Britain's become the first country to approve a COVID vaccine that targets both the Omicron and original strain of the virus. The government says the upgraded Moderna vaccine has been carefully reviewed by its scientific advisory body. It's not clear yet who will be offered the booster or when. Scotland is now the first country in the world to protect the legal right to free period products. The new law means the products must be made available to those who need them by councils and education providers. For the past 5 years, around £27 million has been spent on providing access to the products in public settings. Heathrow Airport has announced it'll extend its cap on passenger numbers until the end of the summer. The airport says a daily limit of 100,000 departing travellers will now apply until October the 29th. Though the cap could be lifted earlier, it says, if it can improve its current labour shortage. And the Met Office has issued a yellow weather warning from today of heavy rain and thunderstorms with the risk of dangerous flooding. The 2-day warning covers most of the UK and may see flash flooding, transport disruption and power cuts. It'll stay in place for southern England until Wednesday. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy $1.208 and 1.187 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,473.47 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, today we've been pondering on the news that more than 20,000, now more than 20,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year. It's already double the total for this point last year. Getting on for 300 migrants were detected on Sunday alone. It's thought the number could get past 21,000 within the next couple of days or thereabouts. Let's turn again, as we have done before, to Kim Rye, who is a resident and I think councillor actually in Lydd in Kent, who's certainly a resident anyway in Lydd in Kent, who, as we've shown you with footage she's filmed herself, has confronted migrants at Dungeness on the beach there, and that's where she joins us from this afternoon. Kim Rye, welcome to you, and thanks as ever for giving us a sort of on-the-ground, on-the-spot view of what's happening down there. It's very easy just to sort of focus on political reaction in Westminster and all the rest of it and forget about the people down there on the beaches. What have you seen today and in the last day or two?
Well, nothing really. If I just spin round, you can see the English Channel behind me. And the reason I'm standing behind this wooden structure is because the wind's up, and that's the reason there's not a lot of activity today. It's very quiet. We haven't had any landings on this beach. This apparently is a popular place. I've never seen any landings here, only at the RNLI station. But this is a place where they often land without an escort, and then they promptly disappear. Over there behind me, across Dungeness, 12 square miles of shingle with quite a lot of bush in the middle of it. And sometimes they turn up outside people's houses. The other day, an old lady just down there would open her door and find 5 of them sitting underneath the window. This is the kind of thing that I find completely unacceptable.
Kim, I'm going to stick with it. I think if you go back to where you were, the signal was fine there. It just broke up a little bit as you moved around. So we'll try one more time. I mean, as you say, there hasn't been much activity in recent days, but there is that sense of not knowing who might just, as you say, literally turn up on your doorstep. And that obviously raises uncomfortable questions about to what extent this operation, which the MOD are in charge of now, makes sure that everybody who lands is processed.
The whole thing is a mess because when you watch the landings at the RNLI station up the road there is Home Office there are police there are Border Force officials, and then you've got Care for Calais in the middle of it all interfering. They shouldn't be there handing packages because at that point the migrants, who are usually men, are being searched. They're under arrest and they're being searched. There's a lot of outside interference going on with this operation, which I completely object to because, no one should be assisting this. This government needs to make proper, safe routes for genuine refugees to come to this country to have a better life. I am not against people coming here for a better life. I just don't like it done illegally and where people around here don't feel safe.
And Kim, beyond people feeling a suspicion of strangers or people they can't vouch for in their neighbourhood, I mean, are there any grounds for people not feeling safe?
Well, yes, because they've turned up in people's gardens. This particular part of the country is a site of special scientific interest. There are no fences, gates, walls, or any kind of privacy around any of these properties. And even in the summer months, they get tourists going right up to their windows, which is a nuisance. But this is a very remote community. When you wake up and find people in your garden, 5 men, and you're an old lady, and there's no one there with you, and also they're seen running up the road, getting into waiting vehicles, standing at bus stops. But the whole thing about this is we don't know who they are. We don't know where they're from. They've got no papers with them. It's all very well collating the figures for people crossing the Channel and being brought into Dover and Dungeness, but there's a wider number of them that are not accounted for. They're in this country and no one knows who they are or where they are, where they've come from or anything about them. That's the problem. It's not the problem that they're migrants. You see, people get mixed up with migrants and refugees. The refugee are people from Afghanistan that are entitled to come here, that helped our soldiers. There are people from Ukraine. We are supposed to be taking in a lot of people from Hong Kong under the Sino-British Declaration. Where are we going to put them? Where? And we've got a country at the moment in the worst economic climate since World War II. We've got people this winter that won't be able to heat their homes. We've got homeless people. We need to get our own house in order first. That's the point I've been trying to make. It's nothing to do with race, colour or anything else. It's a simple matter of security, safety, economics, the NHS, the infrastructure. You can't get a doctor's appointment when you're in hospital. They take precedence in the hospital because I know people who've been to the local hospital and been pushed to the back of the queue. People resent that because they can't see any reason why you can just walk into a country. And this particular coastline was defended in World War II against Operation Sea Lion. You can still see in this landscape there are all sorts of areas in this landscape where there are structures that are to do with World War II. You've got over there, you've got a Napoleonic fort. Further down, you've got more Napoleonic forts that way. You've got gun emplacements down here, bomb craters with bits of shrapnel in, still there from the Second World War. And this countryside the whole place was requisitioned by the army. And all of a sudden, you can just walk in to someone else's country without by your leave. That cannot be right in anybody's country.
No, and I think any right-thinking person will agree with the majority of that sentiment. Kim Rye, as ever, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us from Lydd in Kent there on the beach, actually at Dungeness. Kim Rye joining us there. Ella, quick thought from you?
I think that the point that Kim makes about being able to know who's in a country and have the proper processes is important from the point that she makes in terms of security, but it's also important in terms of people becoming citizens of a nation and being able to access properly the resources, whether it's NHS and housing and things like that, but also to be part of a nation and have a sustainable future in there. And I think, there was actually a point that Al mentioned earlier when we were discussing it, which is, and some others have mentioned it, even those who are more conservative in their approach to immigration than I might be, is that we currently have this incredibly confusing system in which, and you made this point, in which legal immigration and the processes that are there get mixed up with questions of asylum and refugees. And you have, for example, Liz Truss on the one hand saying, I'm going to send them all to Africa, don't worry about it. And then also saying, but actually I'm going to loosen up some regulation here so we get some more people in to pick fruit and work on farms. And it just feels like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. These things are all interlinked and we need a better grip on the system.
Ella, for now, thanks very much indeed. We've been talking quite a bit today about free speech in connection, actually, with Salman Rushdie. I think it's probably, I was going to say attempted assassination against him. That feels true, doesn't it? Until I can be persuaded otherwise, that's what it was. Well, a venue at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, it's faced criticism too for cancelling the second show of the comedian Jerry Shadowitz this weekend. The Pleasance Theatre said it cancelled the show because of the show's alleged racism, misogyny, and a large number of walkouts on the first night of the show. Jerry Shadowitz denies those claims. Our question then, does comedy go too far when it's a joke beyond a joke? We're joined by the comedian Leo Kearse and Angelica Malin, who's editor-in-chief of About Time magazine. Leo, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. And this is your area. I remember seeing Jerry Shadowitz when I was a student. I mean, that's got to be 30 years ago. I don't see how anybody could, unless he's dramatically changed his material, how anybody could claim not to know what you get with him. It's shocking, and that's what it is. And that's what you pay for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's his whole shtick, was being the most grotesque, offensive persona in comedy. And for the Pleasance to book him, not knowing that, and then cancel him, saying, "Oh no, he said some horrific things," I think it's just appalling. They knew what they were getting, and then for them to come out and say, "Oh, we don't censor material," while they're censoring material, is a nonsense. I mean, I think this is a dangerous red line for comedy. We're being encroached on from various angles. If we're not being stabbed by Islamists or shot like the cartoonist Charlie Hebdo were, then we've got the hate crime bill or the online safety bill restricting and criminalising what we can say. We've got the social and cultural movement of wokeism, and that's manifested itself here with the Pleasance cancelling, a comedian who's, I understand some of the old guard, some people, maybe Roy Chubby Brown, they came for them and nobody said anything, but Jerry Sadowitz is very much part of the alternative comedy wave, and he's very much part of the ones that came through after those comedians. So yeah, this is a really dark time for comedy and freedom of speech.
And Angelica, do the people who I mentioned in my introduction there were walkouts? I mean, do the people who are doing the walkout bear any responsibility for this? I'm not for a second saying that people don't have a right to liberate their seat if they find something objectionable. Of course they have, but in a sense, it puts the pressure then on the venue, doesn't it? Because the venue then has an excuse. It can say, well, look, this is commercially suicide because we booked this 200-seat theatre and half of them have walked out.
I mean, yeah, people are speaking with their feet and the venue has to listen to that. I feel uncomfortable with this idea that it's some kind of stage persona, that I've seen this said a few times, that he's playing a character on stage and, he's not actually racist or he's not actually misogynist. But I just don't think we can detach the person on stage from the reality of what he's saying. And it doesn't excuse it, and it does go too far. And I kind of think comedy's moved on, and this kind of content,
excuse me,
that's not what people see anymore.
Can I just say something here? When you go to see James Bond, do you think he's really shooting people?
But that's fiction. This is comedy. He's going on stage. He's going on stage with his own his own name.
All right. When you
he's
go,
going on stage with his own name, so he's going on as himself, and he has accountability.
A lot of comedians,
for what he says.
A lot of comedians don't use their own name. Like, when you go to see a play, do you think it's happening for real? I'm just trying to get, when you look at a painting, do you think you're looking out of a window? Like, what sort of maniac thinks that a comedy performance is some sort of verbatim truth? Sometimes comedians are joking. They're not saying things that are the absolute truth. It's not a press statement by a politician. It's a comedy performance. There's irony, nuance.
It's not the same as a work of fiction. They are going on under their own name. They are going on, and they have an accountability for that. It's not the same as looking at a painting. It's not as detached as that.
Guys, can we just? I mean, hang on, Leo. I'm just going to try to be a bit more empirical about this. Do we know, Angelica? Do you know, and do you feel comfortable even explaining in summary form what it is that Jerry Sadowitz has said, which is so objectionable, sufficiently objectionable indeed, for the venue that booked him to cancel him?
Well, I wasn't at the show myself. I'm not at the Fringe, but I do also know that he exposed himself on stage. If people walk out, that is a message that they're saying that they weren't comfortable with it. Well, maybe he should stop doing that. Maybe he should stop having a platform, because perhaps.
Why
and
should he
let
stop
me just
doing
say
it?
that the gentleman that I'm talking to is not
Do you know what, Angelica? You know what? Can I sorry? Leo, just on that. Well, hang on, guys. An original thought crops into my head. I mean, I was looking on Heaven Forfend on Twitter today, and I was looking at a Pride march where people were practically naked in a public space. Getting out, sharing your body with other people, to some degree, they're more consenting individuals if they've bought tickets. In a world of YouTube, when you know what Jerry Sadowitz involves, and I think Leo's suggesting that, I wouldn't find it particularly appealing, I don't think, but the idea of him exposing himself is part of the act, then we shouldn't be surprised. Who wants to pick up on that?
But then people walked out, so they obviously weren't expecting it, and they didn't enjoy it.
Well, it feels performative. Look at me, I'm walking out. Look at how virtuous I am.
People come to my shows. I've had people come to my shows specifically to get upset. I had somebody write an email to a comedy club I perform at in London saying we came to see Leo's show in July and it was horrific and offensive and unacceptable. And we came back again in October and it was still horrific and unacceptable. Can you please stop booking him? It's like, why don't you stop coming to see my show? You know what I mean? Like, nobody's forcing anybody. Everybody's got Google. There's no excuses for not knowing what you're spending £30 on a ticket for. If you don't like Jerry Sadowitz, don't go to see Jerry Sadowitz. Don't try and restrict artistic expression for other people. There are plenty of shows that involve nudity. I saw an amazing show that won awards at the Fringe with a stand-up comedian who's naked from the waist down. She was a woman, doing an incredible piece of work. I performed with Puppetry of the Penis in Australia, where I was naked on stage, making puppetry with my genitalia. Are we saying, puppetry of the penis now have to be banned? I mean, where does this end? You think Jerry Sadowitz is going to be the only person to be banned?
I'm just making careful notes here. I'll do anything for ratings. Angelica, last word.
Everyone's got to eat. You make your money how you want to, but clearly people didn't find this something that they found funny, and they're allowed to say that. And this isn't some big woke agenda. We can't just ban that word around because you don't like that people have opinions on things. No, it's not that. It's not about cancel culture. Comedy has moved on. The end for Fringe is a celebration of up-and-coming comics. Maybe they're tired of this man.
Angelica,
and
I was going to say,
the platform, give the stage to someone up and coming who people are excited to hear from.
Guys, here's one thing we're going to agree on. I mean, Leo says, Angelica, you haven't seen the show. I mean, why would you? But the truth is, nobody now has the option of going to see it, at least not at that venue, because it's been cancelled. I'll say this, let's hope he gets booked somewhere else in the home of comedy. Leo, Angelica, thanks both very much indeed. Ella Whelan's alongside me. To reflect in what way, Ella?
I just think it's such a willful misunderstanding of what comedy is to think that it's real life. And anybody who is interested in... It's an art form. If anybody's interested in the arts at all,
but it's one that, Angelica's right up to a point, isn't she? That it also reflects on... that's what stand-up comics do. They pour out themselves, their own life stories, don't they?
Exactly, but it's still, it's a cliche to actually say that, one of the things about comedy is that the funniest men and women are often completely different off stage. But this is not about simply exercising your opinion with your feet. This is about exercising your will on other people by banning.
Got to cut you off there, because Michelle Jubilee's going to tell us what's coming up on her show. Michelle.
Hello, Colin. Yes, Keir Starmer, he's back from his holiday with an emergency plan, as you guys have been talking about a lot. So we'll be looking at that. Is it the right suggestions or not? So we're just going around in circles, quite frankly, when it comes to the energy bills. Are we just going to have to suck it up? Also, a year on from Afghanistan, cannot believe that all of that chaos that we witnessed was 1 year ago. Can you? Time flies. So we'll be looking at that, because Lord Dannett says that we need to give more money. Do we? And also, over 20,000 people, as you know, across the channel. What we're going to do about it, Colin? It can't go on, can it? So we'll be looking at all of that and more in just a couple of minutes.
Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for your company this afternoon. Thanks to Ella Whelan too. Her monologue is available online. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Some lively weather out there today following the heat wave. Now the thundery breakdown, a lot of cloud, rain, showers, thunderstorms for many, but not for all. Some places are avoiding the showers and staying dry for the time being. However, low pressure has replaced high, and as a result, a change in the weather is taking place. Cloudier, cooler, rain or showers, as well as some thunderstorms. And the thunderstorms that we're seeing across the southwest, they'll continue into the evening. Further storms setting up across northern England, drifting into parts of eastern Scotland. More general rain here as well. And then a drier, clearer interlude for a time, with temperatures not falling that far overnight. A warm night for many, but further showers will push into South Wales, southwest England from the word go tomorrow, with some of these lively, risk of thunderstorms, and then further showers and thunderstorms will break out across the rest of England and Wales in places, but they will be hit and miss. Where they occur, risk of flash flooding, because of course that heavy rain falling onto hard ground could cause some issues. Where they don't occur, still the potential for 27 Celsius in the southeast, whilst it's much cooler and fresher for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Cloudy here, the rain petering out though later in the day, and clear spells with a brisk northerly breeze. Into Tuesday evening, further showers for a time across parts of England and Wales, particularly through the central swathe of the Midlands, Wales, southwest England. And again, where they occur, risk of some heavy downpours in a short space of time. But another warm night in the south, 18 Celsius, whilst it's much cooler for Scotland and Northern Ireland, 10 to 12 Celsius generally as we start off Wednesday. Brighter skies though for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England on Wednesday morning. Further showers to come further south, and the focus later Wednesday is on southeast England for those thunderstorms. Thursday and Friday look drier and brighter.
Tonight on GB News, at 6 it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
Join my show Farage